What if everything you've ever called depression was actually your soul trying to wake you up? You didn't notice it at first. No sirens, no dramatic collapse, just a subtle shift. The music you used to love felt hollow. The people you once laughed with seemed distant. You were still functioning, still responding to emails, still showing up, but something deep inside you had already started to disappear. It didn't happen in one moment. It wasn't one breakup, one failure, one bad day. It was slower, like fog rolling in beneath the door of your life. At first you ignored it, called it burnout, blamed it on work, on winter, on not sleeping enough. But the truth was simpler and more terrifying. You weren't just tired. You were disconnected from your own soul. You kept nodding in conversations, smiling in photos, doing what was expected. But inside, the silence was growing. The distance between who you were and who you pretended to be was stretching until something had to break. And maybe that breaking wasn't the end. Maybe it was the beginning of something sacred. Because what if Carl Jung was right? What if the descent into darkness isn't a breakdown at all, but a return to the self you abandoned to survive? We're told that depression is a chemical imbalance, a neurological malfunction to be fixed, medicated, or silenced. But what if that definition is too small for what's really happening inside you? What if depression isn't a sign that something is wrong with your mind, but a signal that something is misaligned with your soul? Most people don't realize they're falling into it. There's no explosion, no alarm, just a quiet unraveling. You wake up a little more tired than yesterday. You find yourself staring at walls longer than usual. The things that once lit you up, laughter, art, nature, music, start to feel distant. You keep showing up, but something behind your eyes is fading. You're not really there anymore, just going through the motions. And so you tell yourself what everyone else tells you. It's just stress. It's a phase. Just be positive. But the deeper truth is this: your soul is retreating from a life that no longer feels like home. You've built a version of yourself that performs, achieves, pleases, obeys, but never feels. And now the soul is saying, I can't do this anymore. This isn't a malfunction. It's a revolt. A quiet rebellion against a life that's too small for the truth of who you are. Carl Jung called it the withdrawal of the soul, not a disease, but a sacred signal. Your sadness is not the problem. It's the messenger. It's pointing to everything false that you've been taught to believe about happiness, success, and identity. So maybe you're not depressed. Maybe you're waking up. Not gently, but with the ache of a truth you can no longer suppress. Carl Jung wasn't immune to the collapse. In fact, he stepped into it consciously, terrifyingly, and without a map. At the height of his career, after breaking ties with Freud and questioning the very foundation of everything he believed, Jung felt himself unraveling. But unlike most, he didn't run. He didn't reach for distraction. He didn't medicate the unknown away. He let go. He let the silence consume him. He called it his confrontation with the unconscious, a psychological and spiritual descent that would last nearly 6 years. What he entered wasn't a breakdown in the clinical sense. It was more like a visionary storm. Jung documented what he saw, heard, and felt in what would become his most mysterious and sacred work, the Red Book. He never intended it to be published in his lifetime. Why? Because it was raw, chaotic, blasphemous, beautiful. It was a record of his encounters with gods and monsters, not out in the world, but inside his own psyche. He didn't write theories. He recorded visions, conversations with archetypes, dialogues with shadows. He painted dreams. He followed symbols. And slowly, painfully, he began to realize he wasn't losing his mind. He was discovering it. Most people think healing means returning to the person you used to be. But Jung shows us something bolder, that real healing begins the moment you stop trying to go back. because the person you used to be was created to survive, not to live. Jung's descent wasn't about escape. It was about encounter with truth, with terror, with the fractured pieces of himself. And it was only by facing that inner darkness that he could later bring light into the world, not through safety, but through surrender. What if depression isn't something to be treated, but something to be understood? Something ancient, a rite of passage the modern world has forgotten. Because when the soul no longer recognizes the life it's inhabiting, it doesn't politely ask for change. It withdraws, quietly, powerfully, painfully. Depression in this deeper sense isn't the end of something, it's the beginning of initiation. We don't talk about it that way. In our culture, we're trained to see emotional collapse as a malfunction, a crisis to medicate, to distract, to silence. But ancient cultures knew better. They knew that when a person was overtaken by stillness, fatigue, emptiness, it was often the soul calling them inward, demanding that they shed the false layers and begin a descent into truth. This wasn't weakness. It was a sacred summons. Carl Jung understood this better than most. He wrote that people will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own soul. And yet, that's exactly what depression demands. It strips you of your roles, your ambitions, your masks. It doesn't ask for performance. It asks for presence. And that's why it hurts so much. Because everything you thought defined you begins to dissolve. The goals, the titles, the praise, none of it can reach you anymore. You're not broken. You're being disarmed. So that something deeper, older, and more honest can finally emerge. This is not dysfunction. This is a spiritual initiation. And like any true initiation, it's uncomfortable. You lose your footing. You lose your appetite for what once excited you. You lose your attachment to who you thought you were. But what you gain if you stay is something unshakable. Not relief, not happiness, but truth. And that truth, once found, becomes the foundation for a life that is finally your own. Imagine this. You're in a house filled with voices, laughter, conversations, and you've played every role in every room. The good son, the perfect partner, the strong friend. You've smiled. You've nodded. You've kept the peace. But then one day, you quietly slip out of the living room, past the noise, and step into the basement. The door closes behind you. It's cold. It's dark. And for the first time in years, it's quiet. This is what Carl Jung understood about descent, that true transformation never happens in the spotlight. It happens in the shadows. The basement becomes a symbol for the unconscious, the repressed, the unseen, the place where your real self has been waiting. Most people panic when they get there. They race back upstairs to comfort distraction noise. They turn on the TV, scroll endlessly, call someone, anything to avoid the silence. But not you. If you stay in that darkness long enough, something sacred begins to stir. A whisper rises, not from outside, but from within. It says, "I've been waiting for you." That voice, it isn't madness. It's memory. It's the part of you you abandoned to survive. The part that never wanted to be perfect, just whole. Descent isn't glamorous. It's disorienting. It's the opposite of motivation culture and Instagram mantras. It strips you of momentum and leaves you with truth. And that truth often comes wrapped in confusion, in grief, in aching stillness. But make no mistake, the basement isn't punishment. It's invitation. Jung didn't run from the dark. He made contact with it. And in doing so, he found what most people spend their entire lives avoiding: not comfort, but authenticity. The descent isn't where you lose yourself. It's where you meet the self that's been calling out to you all along. No one tells you that awakening feels like dying. Not physically, but spiritually. You thought it would feel like light, calm, graceful, maybe even peaceful. But instead, it feels like your insides are unraveling. One moment, you're still. The next, you're raging. Then tears come for no reason, followed by a deep numbness that scares you more than pain ever could. You start questioning everything, your choices, your identity, your worth. This isn't healing the way the world sells it. It's raw. It's violent. It's sacred. Carl Jung knew this stage intimately. He called it a confrontation with the unconscious, not a gentle conversation. As your unconscious rises, it brings everything you've buried with it: childhood wounds, repressed shame, silent grief, the dreams you abandoned. It's not here to destroy you. It's here to be seen. Because what we refuse to face doesn't disappear, it governs us from the shadows. This emotional whiplash is not a sign of failure. It's a sign of initiation. A soul in the midst of rebirth rarely feels peaceful. It feels like being set on fire from the inside, not to punish you, but to burn away everything false. You might isolate. You might cry in your car, in your kitchen in silence. You might scream into pillows. You might lose sleep. You might stare at ceilings wondering if you're going insane. But Jung would tell you, you're not breaking down. You're breaking through illusions, through identities that no longer serve you, through emotions that have waited years for your permission to speak. This is the chaos that comes before clarity, and if you're in it, take heart. The storm means you're close. Close to truth, close to stillness, close to finally becoming real. At some point in the descent, something strange happens. You stop craving applause. You stop needing people to get it. You no longer check your phone hoping for likes, hearts, or validation from people who don't truly know you. And it's not because you've become cold or detached, it's because something inside you has shifted. The part of you that once fed off approval has grown tired, starved, numb. You realize often with a quiet ache that none of it ever filled you. This is the stage Carl Jung would call the death of the false self. The self that was built to be admired, accepted, seen. The self that adjusted, performed, chased status, and smiled when it wanted to scream. And now, that self has nothing left to offer you. Not because you failed, but because you've outgrown the need to be seen through borrowed eyes. You begin posting from your heart and no one reacts. And you're okay with that. You speak your truth in a room and some people look away. And you don't shrink. Because something more powerful than approval has taken root inside you: self-respect. Not the shallow kind that boasts, but the sacred kind that stands quietly, even when misunderstood. This is where freedom begins. You realize that validation was the drug that kept your soul sedated. The applause, the praise, the acceptance, it was all a leash disguised as love. And now that you've tasted truth, you can't go back to begging for permission to be real. You don't need the world to make you feel worthy anymore. You remember who you were before anyone taught you to perform. And that memory, that knowing, becomes the most honest kind of power. As you begin to live more honestly, not perfectly, but truthfully, something unexpected happens. People start reacting to you, not because you're saying anything cruel or provocative, but because your presence alone begins to reflect something they've been avoiding in themselves. Carl Jung understood this effect well. He knew that when you integrate the parts of yourself others are still hiding from you, don't just become more real, you become a mirror. And not everyone is ready to see their own reflection. You'll notice it in subtle ways. You speak gently, and someone takes it as judgment. You set a boundary, and they call you selfish. You say no, clearly, calmly, and they accuse you of being cold. But the truth is, you're not hurting anyone. You've simply stopped abandoning yourself to make others feel comfortable. And in doing so, you've disrupted the quiet contract you once had with the world. I'll play small so you can feel big. I'll stay quiet so you won't feel exposed. That contract is broken now. You're no longer performing. You're living from your center, and that center shines a light not outwardly, but inwardly onto others. Some will be drawn to it. Some will feel threatened. Either way, it has nothing to do with you. This is the paradox of awakening. The more grounded you become, the more you'll trigger those who are still running from themselves. Not because you're wrong, but because you're real. And in a world addicted to illusions, authenticity can feel like violence. But your job isn't to soften the truth so others can swallow it. Your job is to become the truth, steady, grounded, and unapologetically whole. You're no longer here to be liked. You are here to reflect what is real. The Red Book was never meant to be a bestseller. Carl Jung didn't write it for the public, the medical community, or even for his students. He wrote it for his soul. It was the private documentation of his descent into chaos, of his encounter with the unconscious, a spiritual map drawn in visions, voices, archetypes, and symbols. And within those pages lies a message that modern psychology has largely forgotten. The human psyche is not a problem to be solved, but a mystery to be entered. Jung didn't medicate his darkness. He didn't retreat into comfort. He entered the storm. In the Red Book, he met two powerful figures, Philemon, the wise inner guide, and the Red One, a seductive, destructive shadow force. They weren't real in the physical sense, but they were deeply real within his psyche. These weren't hallucinations. They were parts of him, disowned, repressed, long ignored. And that's what makes the Red Book so sacred. It's not just a diary. It's a declaration that the way through suffering is not suppression, but symbolic integration. Jung didn't try to fix these inner voices. He listened to them. He asked what they wanted. He painted their forms. He allowed them to speak. And in doing so, he came into contact with the very core of his being, not a polished persona, but the raw, unfiltered truth. This is what your pain is trying to do, not destroy you, but invite you to look inward. Your depression isn't random. It's not a flaw. It's a revolt of the soul against a false life. And like Jung, if you dare to face it, not escape but meet it, you may discover the same revelation he did, that within your darkest visions lies your deepest truth. There's a moment after the collapse, after the grief, after the storm, where you find yourself in a strange, quiet space. You're no longer who you were, but not yet who you're becoming. It's disorienting, uncomfortable, still. This is the in-between, the space where your old identity has crumbled, but your new self hasn't yet arrived. And it's here in this liminal space that the real transformation begins. Carl Jung didn't ascend from his descent with clarity and power overnight. He wandered. He doubted. He questioned everything. He described this phase as a kind of sacred emptiness, a time when the old gods had fallen, but the new ones hadn't yet spoken. And that's where you are now. Suspended between stories, between masks, between meanings. It's tempting to rush through this, to rebuild something, anything, just to feel grounded again. To pick up old habits, reattach to old identities, settle back into old relationships. But don't, not yet. Because this space, as uncomfortable as it feels, is sacred. This is where your new self is being formed, not by striving, but by surrender. The world may look at you and see stillness, laziness, even depression, but they don't see what's happening beneath the surface. They don't see the soul recalibrating. They don't see the layers being stripped away so something more honest can emerge. You're not falling apart, you're molting. And it hurts not because you're broken, but because the shell you once lived in no longer fits. The in-between is where you stop performing, where silence becomes your teacher, where authenticity takes root, not in action, but in being. And though you can't see it yet, this pause is not a failure, it's a doorway. And when you finally walk through it, you'll carry something the world can't give you and can never take away: wholeness. In the modern world, healing is often confused with escaping. We're told to move on, think positive, or just get back to normal. But what if normal was the very thing that broke you? What if the goal isn't to go back, but to go through? Carl Jung understood this deeply. For him, the journey inward wasn't about retreating from life. It was about integrating everything we've avoided: the shadow, the grief, the rage, the forgotten dreams, and reclaiming the parts of ourselves we've exiled in order to survive. You see, if you run from your pain, you don't escape it, you recreate it. In new relationships, in new jobs, in new goals that feel strangely hollow. Pain that is not transformed gets transferred, and the cycle continues disguised in new costumes, repeating itself until you finally stop and face the thing you were most afraid to feel. This is why integration is the true path of awakening. It doesn't mean perfection. It means wholeness. It means holding both your wounds and your wisdom in the same breath. It means no longer seeing your darkness as the enemy, but as the teacher. The version of you that was always trying to be fine no longer has power here. What matters now is honesty. Raw, uncomfortable, liberating honesty. You don't need to meditate your way out of this. You don't need a vision board or a morning routine. What you need is presence and the courage to stay when it's messy. Because real awakening is not about light alone. It's about making the darkness conscious, seeing it, naming it, and letting it become part of you, not to weaken you, but to complete you. Integration is not escape. It's the return home. Not to who you were, but to who you truly are beneath it all. After the collapse, after the silence, after the shedding of everything false, there comes a reckoning, not with the world, but with yourself. The question arises now that I know the truth, how will I live differently? Because awakening is not the final step. It's the invitation to rewrite your life from the inside out. And that means crafting a new internal code, a personal constitution, a sacred manifesto for who you will be now that you're no longer performing. Carl Jung believed that individuation, the process of becoming whole, requires structure, not rigidity. A flexible living framework rooted in truth, not trauma. And that begins with choosing what you will no longer tolerate from yourself. No longer trading authenticity for approval. No longer chasing empty ambitions that impress, but don't fulfill. No longer shrinking to make others comfortable. Your new code doesn't need to be poetic, it just needs to be honest. Something like, I protect my peace like it's sacred. I express what's real, not what's easy. I no longer explain my worth. I give love but never beg for it. I walk away without guilt. These are not affirmations, they're vows. Promises to the version of you who stayed through the storm, who didn't numb out, who felt everything and kept breathing anyway. Because the world won't stop trying to pull you back into the old performance, into roles you've outgrown. But your new self, if it's rooted in clarity, will smile quietly and say, I don't live there anymore. And that's the power of writing a new code. You're no longer reacting to life, you're creating it. Not to please the world, but to remain faithful to the self that finally remembers who it is. One of the most radical acts you can commit in today's world is this: to stop calling yourself broken, to stop reducing your inner suffering to a clinical label. That's not to dismiss the real pain you feel, but to challenge the idea that pain must always mean pathology. Depression is real, but it's not always a malfunction. Sometimes it's a message, one that can't be heard through the noise of modern life, social media, or even mainstream mental health language. Carl Jung didn't see depression as something to be medicated away. He saw it as a soul state, a descent initiated by the unconscious, when the life you're living becomes too far removed from your truth. And what the world calls symptoms, Jung saw as signs: the exhaustion, the disinterest, the numbness, the isolation. These aren't defects, they're signals that your soul is revolting against a life that no longer fits. To transcend the label of depression doesn't mean pretending you're fine. It means realizing that what you're going through may be necessary. It may be the soul's demand for realignment, not erasure. And that shift in perception changes everything. You stop asking, "How do I fix this?" and start asking, "What is this trying to show me?" When you take off the label, you begin to reclaim your agency. You realize your emotions are not your enemy, they're your internal compass. You begin to see the pain not as a prison, but as a portal. And through that portal, something ancient and true begins to rise. You are not your diagnosis. You are not a victim of chemistry alone. You are a soul in the process of remembering itself, and that process is not a disorder, it's a rebirth. Real awakening doesn't look like the movies. There's no choir of angels, no sudden peace, no perfect sunrise where everything falls into place. More often, it looks like falling apart, quietly, painfully, alone. It's crying in your car for no reason. It's losing your appetite for the life you used to chase. It's walking into familiar places and feeling like a stranger in your own story. This is the moment most people mistake for failure. But Carl Jung knew better. He said, "There is no coming to consciousness without pain." And this is that pain, the sacred fire that burns not to destroy, but to purify. When your soul begins to wake up, it doesn't whisper. It shakes you. It pulls away your distractions, peels back your illusions, and demands that you feel everything you've tried to avoid. Grief, rage, shame, longing, numbness, clarity, all in the same hour. You think something's wrong with you, but this is exactly what it means to become real. The fire is not punishment, it's transformation. And like all fires, it consumes. It consumes your masks, your performances, your roles. It leaves you raw, uncertain, unpolished, but also free. Because now for the first time, you're no longer living for applause or validation. You're living from something deeper, your own soul. You lose things in the fire, people, comfort, identity. But what remains is gold, not shiny, but solid. A kind of grounded truth no one can take from you. This is what Jung found on the other side of madness, not a theory, but a rebirth, not a cure, but clarity. So if you feel like everything is collapsing, don't run. Stay in the fire. It's not your destruction, it's your becoming. No one talks about what happens after the awakening begins. They speak of healing, of clarity, of finding your purpose, but they rarely mention the in-between. That strange hollow ache that settles in once the illusions have burned away, but before anything new has fully taken root. You thought awakening would feel like light. Instead, it feels like loss. Loss of identity, of certainty, of connection to the world you once fit into so easily. It's not that you hate your life, it's that it no longer speaks to you. The passions you once chased feel empty. The friends you once clung to feel far away. You scroll through your own memories and barely recognize the person smiling in them. Carl Jung understood this phase deeply. The post-awakening silence is not peace, it's a vacuum, a spiritual suspension. You've stopped pretending and now the mask is gone. But what remains is raw space. And in that space, doubt creeps in. Did I go too far? Did I ruin everything? Why do I feel lonelier now that I've told the truth? Because this is the cost of truth. You lose the world that loved your false self. And in the absence of that noise, you meet the only companion who matters, your real self. It doesn't come with fireworks. It comes in the stillness, in long walks, in long silences, in learning to sit with your discomfort instead of numbing it. You become less reactive, more observant. You don't chase joy, you embody stillness. You don't beg for love, you become it. This isn't the end of your journey. It's the beginning of a different kind of living, one rooted not in performance but in presence. You're not broken. You're simply walking through the quiet aftermath of your own becoming. Life lesson. You are not broken. You are being rebuilt from within. If there is one truth to carry from all this, it is this: your pain has purpose. What you call depression might not be a sign that you're broken, but that you're finally confronting everything that is false, unfinished, and unlived within you. This isn't a flaw. It's an invitation, an initiation, a sacred process that strips away who the world told you to be so you can finally become who you really are. In a culture that glorifies speed, performance, and constant positivity, it takes radical courage to slow down, go inward, and listen. Most people numb their discomfort with noise, achievement, or superficial comfort because silence is terrifying. But silence is also where truth lives. Jung showed us that when you walk into that silence and make contact with the parts of yourself, you've hidden your sadness, your rage, your longing. You don't fall apart. You come home. So here's the lesson. Don't rush your rebirth. Don't fight the fire meant to refine you. Instead, create space in your life for honest solitude. Journal without filters. Say no when something drains you. Stop apologizing for your depth. And most of all, stop waiting for others to understand your awakening. You don't need validation to be real. You don't need to feel better to be on the right path. You just need to stay with yourself, especially when it gets hard. Because the truth is, you're not falling behind. You're just finally becoming real.